Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Just going to wait for some stragglers to come in. I'll do a little introduction of myself and my colleague in a little bit. Give me 1 second. If you can hear me, can you type into the live chat that we're making sure that all the audio is working right now? Okay. We'll be starting in a few minutes. We're going to make sure some of the audio and video is working correctly. We'll probably get started in a couple minutes. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. I'm going to just start with a few logistics. So this is our first time doing a YouTube live stream, so bear with us if we learn a little bit about how this works. I'm here with my colleague, Samantha Emmer. She's going to be running the live chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask on there, and I'll be happy to kind of pause, dive a little bit deeper in what we're talking about, or answer any questions you might have. But to get started, I just kind of want to introduce Global Fishing Watch. I know the focus of this webinar is going to be the Indonesian project, but just in case you guys are very new to this project, how we like to introduce Global Fishing Watch is that it is basically a tool used to see where fishing is occurring all over the world. And this image is kind of the good introduction to it, because what you see here are a number of Chinese fishing vessels in the South China Seas leaving after a moratorium in which fish are allowed to reproduce and respawn and eventually get to the point where they can be fished again. And industrial size fishing is no, you can see the number of vessels here. And even when we zoom out, you can start getting a bit better picture of how many fishing vessels there are in this industry. And we can even zoom out one more time, and then you'll be able to see the size of the industry in China. And I don't want to be picking on China here, but this is we're able to happen to see this is because a photographer was able to climb up this hill and to take a picture of all the fishing vessels in this bay. So what we were thinking was, what if we were able to zoom out one more time? If we were to look at the entire world and see where fishing was occurring all over the world. This is what we think it'd look like. So this is Global Fishing Watch. Each point here is an individual vessel location where fishing is occurring based on our machine learning algorithms. It's using satellite data to identify the movement track patterns of where fishing is occurring and put it on Google Maps. And while there's a lot of data to absorb here, you can see that's happening over time. The big thing is that when you put it on a map, you can start seeing patterns. For example, if you look at the equator, you see the induction zone. This is where warm waters come together, and there's a lot of nutrients here that are lacking, and as a result, you don't see as much fishing around there. You see fishing that occurs along the EEZ. And if you go to globalfishingwatch.org right now, and you take a look at the map, you can go ahead and play around with some of this data, move around, and I won't be going too in-depth into that. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask in live chat. I'm happy to jump a little bit deeper. One thing I want to talk about in terms of Global Fishing Watch is AIS data. The reason for this is because one of the big partnerships we have with Indonesia is the fact that they're providing VMS data. And I wanted to introduce what AIS data is, just so you can understand the difference. So originally, Global Fishing Watch is entirely based on using AIS messages to understand where vessels are. AIS messages are broadcasted by boats, by buoys, a number of other things, and then received by other boats in a way to manage vessel collision. So therefore, if a boat is about to run into each other, another boat can see the track of where that boat is. And if you see at the bottom in the middle right there, they're allowed to change their trajectory such that the vessels don't collide. And over time, terrestrial receivers were set up. Certain harbors and certain bays were able to put up terrestrial receivers to be able to manage their waters better. And even more recently, satellites were put up, low orbit satellites that can receive satellite AIS data and use it for global management. And that's what Global Fishing Watch is. So this has been a recent development. In 2012, there were only 2 low orbit satellites in the Orbcomm data set, which is what we were using. And you can kind of see exactly what our visibility and coverage is kind of over this map here right now. A year later, they added 1 more satellite and slowly getting a little bit more coverage. And you can see as I move forward through the slides that by 2015, 2016, we're starting to get global coverage. So obviously this is not full coverage, and it would be hard to have full coverage, but what this allows us to do is be able to see most of the world every few hours and see where fishing is occurring, at least based on our algorithm. So here's a static shot of our AIS data, and you can definitely see where all the ship movement patterns are, the trade routes, and of course, a subset of this is what we look at for fishing. So before I jump into Indonesia, are there any questions? I can pause for a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions about Global Fishing Watch and how it works. I guess we're getting a notification that some people are on a different live stream. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to keep going, but Samantha next to me is going to try to figure out exactly how to get them onto this live stream. And of course, once they join, we'll be able to answer any questions they might have that we might have missed. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about Indonesia right now. So this partnership started a couple years ago when we met Minister Susi in the top left right there. She's kind of a famous figure in the fisheries conservation space. Most notably, she has really cracked down on illegal fishing, particularly in a spectacular way by catching these vessels and blowing them up. So in the pictures you see here was the most recent United Nations General Assembly, the Ocean Summit, in which we talked with the Indonesian KKP government in order to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of this partnership. The original agreement was that Indonesia would give us VMS data, which I will explain a little bit about what it is a little bit later, and put it on Global Fishing Watch. And you can see our presentation here showed a little bit about how we took that VMS data, put it into Global Fishing Watch, and that's exactly what I'll be showing a little bit later. So the partnership we have with Indonesia was that we would be able to take Indonesian VMS and put it on Global Fishing Watch, and that was a huge deal for us. The most notably, you can see on the animated image right there, that there's a lot of coverage that we get because of Indonesian VMS. Lots of parts of the water that we weren't able to see are now visible because we're able to see the Indonesian VMS data set. In exchange, we're providing analysis to support them in their conservation efforts. As I mentioned, Minister Susi's very excited about making sure her waters are safe, and what we do is provide analysis about where she can focus in order to help her in her efforts. Providing training and knowledge. We've made a few trips to Indonesia this year in which we provided workshops and helped out with their analysts to figure out how to use Global Fishing Watch for this purpose. And eventually we want to allow them to run it themselves. We're building automation, workspaces, and reports that they can use in order to understand exactly how Global Fishing Watch and Indonesian VMS can work together. And I'll be talking about each one of these individually a little bit later as well. And one of the main questions we get is, how does this help Indonesia? So Indonesia, when you talk about VMS, this is a proprietary data set that, for the most part, other countries have kept private. It is a data set that has some concerns around making sure that no certain other parties don't get it. So Indonesia has decided that transparency is a larger important issue for sharing Indonesian VMS. One of the great things about that is that they're leading the way in the space. So as the first country to do it, they've kind of started the ball rolling. Peru has publicly committed to sharing their VMS as well, and we're in talks with other countries to do the same. And the reason why they may want to do it is that for countries that are large players in the fishing industry, they want to be able to be very transparent about what they're doing. This helps in negotiations and treaties, and probably most importantly, it sets a precedence for managing foreign vessels that are fishing in Indonesia, that was one of the main concerns for Minister Susi. By being able to say, we're so stringent on our boats to be able to know where they are and how to manage them, and be able to set up alerts that we can use it and be able to share that with the world, any other boats that wants to do the same and fish in Indonesian waters will have to follow that kind of rule set. And of course, by sharing with the global community, you're able to leverage the world resources. Analysts like myself, I actually work for Google. I'm able to look at this data halfway around the world and try to provide analysis and understanding of exactly what's happening in Indonesia. And of course, what we try to do is make sure that we only share enough data that is needed. So right here is actually two different workspaces, which I'll demonstrate in the live demo in a bit. But on the private workspace side, this is only accessible to members of Minister Susi's team. This is the KKP, which in case they're able to actually take a look at inside Global Fishing Watch, obviously in Bahasa, while the public workspace, which is accessible to anybody on this call, at globalfishingwatch.org, if you just click on the Indonesia link, what you're able to do is take a look at the fishing activity that's happening. And what this allows is that it protects individual vessels from being identified. It provides a range for their width, their gross tonnage, and their length, such that they're not able to be identified in any particular way, but allows us to see the overall activity that's happening in Indonesian waters in terms of fishing activities. And of course, we're sharing a bunch of reports that I mentioned with the KKP. So in addition to just understanding where fishing is, the KKP has been working with us to identify particular activities. For example, we're able to identify fishing activity in regions that they're not allowed to fish. We're also able to identify when vessels have certain behavior. Maybe they're staying out at sea for too long, or maybe they're encountering other vessels and we're not sure if that's a sanctioned transshipment or not. So these types of reports are being generated automatically, shared with the KKP, and allows them and kind of gives you a visibility of why this kind of data sharing initiative allows for Indonesian fisheries government to benefit. Okay, so I've done enough talking. What I'm going to do is kind of start setting up the live demo, and this is a good time to start asking questions. And while I get set up, I'll take a peek at the questions Samantha will show me. Give me 1 second. So one of the questions is that whether this data includes data from GPS. I don't believe so. So AIS and VMS are two different protocols that uses different technologies. And have you considered adding imagery to it? So imagery would be great. So the thing about using live imagery, which we've heard a lot, it would be extremely helpful for supplement this product, is the thing is that it costs a lot. So we have individual cases where we've worked with other organizations that do satellite imagery to get particular images, but for the most part, it's probably going to be a separate product from Global Fishing Watch. Oh, that's a great question by Samantha. The question is, how do you know the VMS data belongs to fishing vessels rather than cargo ships? So VMS as a technology is particularly different from AIS in the sense that there's a guaranteed delivery system. It's pretty costly to implement, but that's also why the data is so much more effective. So basically, the short answer is that there's a lot of regulation on it. It's not easily spoofed, unlike AIS, which there is some spoofing issues with it, which we have to clean. But for the most part, VMS is a government system that is regulated by government, and therefore the data that we receive is already scrubbed using their internal system. Samantha's also asking, can vessels that are fishing illegally simply turn off their VMS system? They can, or kind of, but they're not legally allowed to. So the protocol in Indonesia, I believe, is that any vessel over 30 gross tons that are fishing has to be broadcasting. So even if they decide to turn it off, that in itself is already a violation, then in which, you know, certain legal action can be followed up. So Christine's asking, how many vessels are you monitoring on VMS for Indonesia? I believe the total number is around 5,000, and I think we see around 3,000 active maybe every month. Okay, if there are other questions, feel free to keep asking. I'm going to hop back onto the live chat and see, answer them a little bit later. So what you see here being shared right now is the actual Global Fishing Watch website using Indonesian VMS data. You can see the layer right here. If I turn on Indonesian VMS, you actually see all the VMS activity. I'm going to turn it off just so you can see the particular boat vessels I wanted to point out. So here are two vessels that we're able to pin. So what we're being able to see here is that one vessel, the pink vessel, which is a VMS vessel, Pelangi Samudra Dua, it's able to move around the Global Fishing Watch map, and then you see the other track moving along right with it. So this is a good example of we're able to see two vessels moving together, and only one vessel ends up going back to Bali. So that's Bali up there in port. And this isn't an illegal behavior by any means, but what this allows us to see is understand exactly how fishing activity is occurring in Indonesia, in which one vessel is actually able to stay out indefinitely because the other vessel is able to go back and supply. But this does give you an insight into exactly, you know, how some vessels actually can stay out on water for a long, long time. So that's one particular insight we're able to share. Another example is, actually, I'm going to skip this example because I'm going to show it a little bit later in a different context. This is a good one. So notice that what I'm doing is I'm saving these workspaces and allows me to just click on a link and goes exactly to where you want. This is something you can do as well, in which if you went to the Global Fishing Watch map website, you found a particular boat that you liked or a particular, you know, image or screen that you like, you're able to click this button right here and save the workspace. And that link will go to exactly whatever link you were on at the time. So in this example, what you're seeing is a vessel leaving Central Java. And it cuts across, and one thing to note is that we included the registered fishing region where it's allowed to fish right here. It's a 713, so that's this region right in the middle right here where it's crossing right now. And what you see happening is that it's basically cutting right across all the way until it goes to 718. Our fishing algorithm picks it up, which is why you see this bold pink area. I can zoom in. And you see the fishing activity actually happening in 718 in the Arafura Sea. And that's particularly interesting because Arafura Sea is a kind of like a lawless area that had a lot of issues in terms of legal fishing in recent times. So it's fishing here, and it does it for a few months. they're looking at 8 days worth of track each time as I move it through. And slowly, you can see that it eventually moves back. I can actually expand it out a little bit, and it starts going back. So this is a very clear and cut case of where we can see phishing activity that violates whatever local region it is. And I want to note that Indonesian VMS on Global Phishing Watch does allow us to see all these things, but we're not in the business of enforcing or deciding whether something is legal or not. But what this allows is that for those who are experts of Indonesia fisheries policy or whatever, they're able to take data like this and events like this and try to come up with the right policies or help out enforcement initiatives or regulation initiatives. Another example of something KKB said that was particularly interesting is they want to know when a fishing vessel spends a long time at sea. So now you can see that I'm able to actually adjust expansion of how long the fishing track we see on Global Fishing Watch. So right now we see 3 months. So you see that in October, actually it's closer to December. This boat leaves Bali. It looks like it's Bali. You can actually zoom in and take a look at that. So it leaves Bali, and then it disappears right around the EZ. Give me 1 second. So, so it leaves around the EZ and then disappears. We don't know if that's intentional or maybe it's a technical issue, but over time, if you notice enough vessels disappearing right after they cross the EZ, it is definitely interesting. However, it turns on the VMS again, and we're able to pick up all this fishing activity across Western Australia. And you notice that even though it left in December, this boat has been out all the way until May, June, July, and it's only, I guess, maybe in July it starts heading back to sea. And then once again, as it approaches Indonesian waters, it turns off its VMS. So there was a question a little bit earlier about whether people can turn it off. It is possible, but you can see that with understanding enough events that are happening, you do still kind of see a bigger picture here in which we're able to ask a vessel like this what they were doing if it was against whatever rules that were set forth. And I'm going to jump into my favorite example now. So this one actually has 11 vessels pinned to it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn them all on. And what I've done is you can notice that I'm able actually to color code a lot of these vessels. So in a lot of cases, if you're using this tool as a way to visualize and explain what's happening, it's really helpful that there's a lot of these custom functionalities. But what I've done is I took all the VMS vessels I was able to find and colored them pink. And there's one AIS vessel that was happening to interact with all of them. I'm going to go ahead and press play. And you can kind of see what's happening right now. The Dongwon is actually moving in and out of Singapore, jumping around and bunkering with all these vessels that you see in the Indonesian VMS data set. So what we have here is a vessel in which we identify events such as encounters. We identify certain vessel. The vessel that was out for 3 months is included in the data set. We're able to see when it turned off its VMS. We identified fishing activity. And really, by piecing it all together is really how you tell this full story. My understanding is that this particular example isn't actually illustrating any nefarious behavior or anything like that. I believe the AIS vessel that we're showing, the blue one, is a fueling bank vessel. But in the case where we're able to identify certain vessels that are possibly transshipping or doing other things that people might be interested in, this is the kind of story you can tell using this tool. Great. So that's a good place to pause. Like I know I went kind of quickly through all the examples, and I know for those who aren't familiar with Global Fishing Watch, you guys probably want to play around with it before you truly understand what's happening. But I'll pause there and see what other questions we have. I'll give a few minutes in case someone's still typing. And of course, if there's particular things that you guys want to talk about, whether it's like VMS data, or maybe you're more interested in how VMS technology works or AIS technology works, I can pivot and focus a little bit on that as well. Okay, I'm going to move ahead. So I'm going to jump back into our presentation. Let me get back into presentation mode. Give me 1 second. Okay. Oh, so what you've seen so far is us taking the Indonesian VMS data, putting it on Global Fishing Watch, and also using various different ways to identify particular events that they needed. This was the thing that we showed at the United Nations a few months ago at the UN General Assembly Ocean Summit. And it went pretty well, because what Minister Susi said was that she wanted us to go back to Indonesia in order to be able to show what we've been doing with the rest of her organization. So I arrived there a few weeks ago, and they took me down to a giant all hands in which people from all over the department, from all the islands, kind of came together to do a budget review. And I talked a little bit about some of the ways we could use Indonesian VMS. You see me presenting here. This was in Jakarta, in which I'm talking to various members of the enforcement team, the regulatory team, the data team, talking a little bit about what we've been doing with Indonesian VMS. And that went over really well too. So the very next day, Minister Susi invited the Global Fishing Watch team, myself, and a few others to talk to the press. And we talked a little bit about why this is really powerful. We went to a conference room in which we were asked a lot of questions. We talked a little bit about data. I gave a similar presentation to what you saw just now about what we can do with Indonesian VMS. And most of the coverage was really positive. We got 31 web media hits, 66 social media mentions, and possibly a reach of 3.5 million people, probably all in Indonesia. You see some of the articles in the background of what of some of the things mentioned in Global Fishing Watch. So this is why we're particularly excited about Global Fishing Watch in partnership with Indonesia. We believe originally when we started Global Fishing Watch that was a very powerful tool that's focused on probably an industry that most common people might not be aware of. 1 billion people depend on fish as a primary source of protein, and most of that has disappeared in our lifetime. We know that 85% of global fisheries are overfished at capacity or recovering, and 1 in 5 fish that we have today or that we eat are illegal, unregulated, or undocumented. And Indonesia is a big part of that. They're the world's 2nd largest producer of fish. We have over 5,000 now broadcasting fishing vessels that we're able to add to the Global Fishing Watch data set. And 54% of Indonesia's animal protein comes from fish. So to us, while our goal is to eventually be able to have a global solution that allows us to have transparency and visibility of where fishing is happening all around the world, we believe a big part of that is working with the various states around the world, especially the big players in the fishing industry, in order to have them join this global community and be able to share their data and be able to just be transparent about what's going on, such that we as a global community, which views the ocean as a global resource, are able to monitor it and regulate it in a sustainable way. So once again, my name is Aaron. I'm a data scientist with Google. We also have Samantha here next to me. She's the business development and marketing manager, and feel free to contact us about anything you guys might need, questions you might have. I feel like there's probably a few questions on the chat right now. We'll get to that soon. This is our first time using YouTube Livestream, but my understanding is that this whole thing is recorded. Samantha will be putting this on the web and probably sharing with anyone that needs it, so just in case you guys want that. It'll be on the YouTube channel. Okay, so Samantha, welcome to the webinar. Glad that you're a master's student working on IU phishing. I'm sure we can follow up in terms of recommendations. We'll be sending out a survey, which should be in the description. And I think if you click show more, you see a link to a Google form. Go ahead and fill that out, and probably Samantha will reach out to you about next steps. Paul is actually the CEO or the CTO of Global Phishing Watch. So thanks, Paul, for jumping in and helping out with the questions. That is true. So Christine, you're asking if we go to GFW now, whether we can see the VMS data. So it might be a little bit confusing. I actually can show it. So the Global Phishing Watch map by default actually doesn't have VMS data. So what I'm showing right now is just globalphishingwatch.org. You're able to just go to that page, and on the first kind of window that we have there on the top left, it says Indonesia becomes the first nation to publicly share VMS data. Or you can click on this link right here, Indonesia reviews its phishing fleet to the world. Click on that. And then this link right here where it says go to live Global Phishing Watch map actually goes to a very specific workspace that has VMS. So here you see the global view of VMS and AIS together. And this is not something you'll see on the world map, but you see that the VMS activity is actually included here. And of course, this is the public version, so, where I showed some of the differences of the private and the public version a little bit later, and you will have to be part of the KKP to see the private version. So the VMS will eventually be added into Global Phishing Watch, but for now, we're keeping them separate. Feel free to keep asking questions. I'm going to go around and show a little bit about the map. Joan is asking, is there any spatial overlap of AIS data and VMS data? How are you treating this overlap? That's a great question. Let me see if I can find one of my backup slides on that. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So there's two really great advantages of having the VMS. One of them, like I said, was that we're able to see things that we haven't been able to see before. But at the same time, some vessels are broadcasting both VMS and AIS. I believe the global kind of regulation for AIS is any vessel over 300 gross tons. VMS is any fishing vessel over 30 gross tons in Indonesia. So obviously, there's some vessels that are both. So what this allows us to do is that it allows us to validate. And you'll hear this a lot in terms of solutions that include both AIS and VMS. So on the right there, you see the AIS track. You see a vessel leaving Morocco, and then there's a data gap. It kind of moves around. But what's really happening here, if you ever looked at the interactive workspace in which the vessel is missing, where the vessel is actually missing a lot of its track. And then when we were able to see the same vessel on VMS, you get us much more granularity. This helps not only visually, but also helps our algorithm. Because our algorithm relies on kind of these track patterns to understand whether something is phishing or not. And by getting more granularity and being able to validate against each other, it kind of strengthens our data set on both sides. So we do have currently both tracks in there, and we also use the ones that are overlapping in order to identify and improve our algorithms. Great question, though. It seems like there's some researchers on the call here. So actually what I'm going to do is show you one basic feature of Global Phishing Watch that I have not talked about yet. And that's about adding your own layer. So when I clicked on the layer tab right here on the right, you notice I was able to toggle a lot of these things. I'm able to turn on the VMS activity. So you can see that this VMS activity is all in Global Phishing Watch and just centered around Indonesia, which makes sense. I zoom out a little bit, I can turn on to AIS. Of course, that will take a little bit longer load, but this is 7 days in December 2016, all the phishing activity that we've seen around the world. Turn on different layers just to be able to kind of map out exactly the regions that you might care about. And EEZ in particular is very interesting because you can see the activity that happens right along the border or near MPAs and things like that. So this is great, and we added a lot of the more popular ones that people who are interested in the space would use. But you're also able to add your own custom layer. So basically, if you guys are familiar with geospatial tech, there's a type of file called KML. You can use Google Earth to kind of create it from other shape files and whatever. And if you're able to put it on a public website, you just link that here, and you're able to actually put it on here. So one good example of that is actually, we've been working a little bit with our partners using Veer's technology, and that's being able to use lights to identify phishing activity. And by lights, I mean literally boats who are shining a light. And we use satellites that can satellite technology that can absorb low intensity light. So here's a good example. You see Jakarta, extremely bright, really populated city. And of course, you see all these lights kind of right in the middle of there. That's boats that are on the water. We're able to turn that, or someone else is able to turn that into a layer, a KML file in particular. And what I'm able to do is actually open up a workspace where I actually save that layer and show you that this is all just a KML file that we're able to take a look at. And even better, I'm able to look at the different layers overlapping. So I just turned on VMS, and you see that there's definitely a lot of correlation. So just on this one day, we saw all the VMS phishing, or actually the full VMS activity overlap here. And obviously there's a lot of vessels that either didn't have their lights on or weren't broadcasting, but this definitely helps researchers understand whether their initiative is working or not. Of course, you can add AIS as well. This is the full AIS data set. And you can kind of also see the very powerful ability of having 3 technologies, get coverage for everything. So Ame, if I'm saying that name right, apologies. Can you speak a bit about how Indonesia specifically is using this to monitor their fishing fleet and what they're finding vis-a-vis IUU? Sure. So what we're doing is we're partnering with the Indonesian government where they give us the data, we provide kind of these insights and algorithms and send it back to them. And they already had a few of their own systems set up, but the idea is that we're giving them reporting that allows them to see certain events. Things like they mentioned they wanted to see transshipments. They mentioned that they wanted to see fishing activity that occurs in regions that they're not allowed to fish because part of VMS data includes the registered fishing zone. More recently, they asked a little bit about the impact of a moratorium and see whether fishing activity has actually stopped or improved the region's kind of health. So basically, where we see Global Fishing Watch in terms of what our strengths are is we're able to take data like VMS, like AIS, we're able to apply some of these big cloud technologies onto it and our experts in fisheries such that we are able to extract fishing events. And the Indonesian government is able to take those events that they requested and use it for whatever they need. We work with various parts of the Indonesian government, including their enforcement team, their policy team. We've even talked a little bit to the Coast Guard and Navy, and they're interested in an alert system. So there's a lot of things in the works, a few things already happening, and for the most part, we're developing a very strong partnership in which they're basically using the insights we extract from their data in order to help monitor. So yeah, keep asking questions. I do want to mention that one of the most helpful things that you can do for us is that there's a survey in the description of the YouTube video. You just want to click a little show more, and there should be a link to a form there. go ahead and fill that out. That'll be the best way to kind of reach out to us if you want to talk about partnership opportunities, or perhaps you just more interested in learning how to use the website. Yeah, that's a great place to go, and we'll definitely follow up. Okay, so Layla is asking, what's the legal basis in Indonesia to use this data and prosecute the IUU phishing? So I'm not the expert in this case, but I can say that we've worked with their legal team, and they, as the entity of the fisheries ministry in Indonesia, they own the data, the VMS data. And Minister Suzy, who leads that department, is able to kind of use it in the best way that she sees best fit to share it publicly in a way such that we get insights, and that way, and what she believes is that this public transparency allows for better enforcement. In terms of the actual legal process in which whether these reports get put into maybe a prosecution case or anything like that, we don't get too involved in that, but we do work with those teams, and they have often asked us for reporting, analysis, and it's up to them if they want to use it for these cases. So the Blue Nomads team, they're asking about VMS for other countries. So currently, Indonesia is the first and only country to publicly share their VMS. But this is one of the reasons why we're already excited about this, because we believe that this is a very good first step, and we believe other countries will also be interested in some of the advantages that they see Indonesia got from sharing. Peru has publicly announced that they are wanting to share VMS with us as well, and publicly, and get the same kind of insights. And of course, we're talking to a number of other countries, all who are usually players in the fishery space, to see if they'd be interested as well. So we have enough time for maybe 2 more questions. Go ahead and ask them. I'm happy to also follow up online if you go ahead and fill out that survey. If there are any engineers out there, I'm also happy to talk a little bit about some of the back end, exactly the technology we use, machine learning, how we partner with Indonesia in order to get that VMS data set into a working layer on Global Fishing Watch. Or you can just take a look at this flowchart. So we know that human trafficking and the fisheries industry has some high visibility reports. I don't know if, since we started partnering with Indonesia, getting their VMS data and setting up the engineering needed to put it on our website, whether any of our data has helped with that. For the most part, how we see it is that the data comes to us, and in the case of Indonesia, we also extract the insights they want and we give it back to them. There isn't too much of a follow-up to see, exactly how it's used. For our understanding is really the data belongs to them, and we would love to help them with the algorithms and support them in their cause to share the data publicly. But I don't believe our data has been used specifically for any human trafficking cases. So AIM is asking, it's a huge amount of data for governments and departments to parse. What does government capacity building look like? So the VMS system set up by Indonesia was done through a French company, I believe, and there was definitely a lot of upfront investment. VMS as a technology takes a good amount of resources in order to implement. There's a centralized data system. There's a guaranteed delivery method. Obviously, there's also working with the satellite providers and the data. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't speak to exactly the process how a hypothetical government should build out their VMS system, but I'm sure there are plenty of experts out there that would be happy to help them with that. So Blue Nomad, you're asking about the MPA layers. So we use MPI Atlas. That's kind of the layer we use for to put on our map. I didn't even notice. So we're moving to Protected Planet in a couple months for our MPA layer as well. Okay, I'll ask a question if Paul doesn't steal it from me. So Paul, appreciate you here, of course. Looks like that's a follow-up for Paul. I'm just gonna let him take it. Are there any costs associated for the country? Does the country have to pay Google or Global Fishing Watch? The answer is a definite no. The partnership here is completely not financial. In fact, when we visited Minister Susi last, the press asked the same thing. They were saying, what is Google getting, or what is Minister Susi getting from Google as part of this partnership in which VMS data is given to Global Fishing Watch? Minister Susi basically said, I've gotten one t-shirt that did not fit, which was the t-shirt we brought for her that has the Global Fishing Watch logo. So for us, this is about transparency. It's about conservation. It's an effort that we believe makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because we have the technology to do it now. And the idea is that in the partnerships that is needed such that we can take massive amounts of data, put it on a map, and also provide analysis for entities that are interested in improving their conservation efforts and their fisheries management. And that's really all we're interested in helping out with. All right, so I think we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming. And of course, if you have any questions, please fill out the survey in the details. And hopefully we'll see you guys on the website and hear a little bit about some of the cool things that you might be doing with it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.